Max Verstappen just did something that could change Formula One, and almost nobody understands how serious it is. In the middle of a Formula One season, between two Grand Prix weekends, he showed up at the Nurburgring. Different car, different rules. One of the most dangerous tracks in the world. And within minutes, he was already faster than drivers who have spent years there. But that's not the real story. Because he didn't just drive a GT3 car. He drove a Mercedes. Yes, a Mercedes. Red Bull's biggest rival. And what he discovered inside that car is exactly what has drivers nervous right now. Because this wasn't a test. It was a calculated move, part of a long-term plan toward the 24 hours of Nürburgring. And here's where it gets dangerous. This track exposes everything. No room for mistakes. No margin for learning. Either you adapt instantly, or you crash. And Verstappen didn't just survive. He looked like he had been there for years. Calm, precise, efficient. Almost too comfortable. So now the question isn't what he did. It's what he's becoming. Because if a Formula One driver can dominate in a completely different machine, on the hardest circuit in the world, against specialists, then what happens when he comes back to Formula One with that experience? Stay with me, because what really happened that weekend is much bigger than it looks. What made this moment even more unsettling wasn't just that Verstappen showed up. It was the timing. Right in the middle of a Formula One season. Between two Grand Prix weekends. No off-season. No long preparation window. Just a narrow gap in the calendar, and a decision that felt almost surgical. Because this was not random. The Nürburgring race had been moved, specifically to fit that window. Think about that for a second. An entire event, adjusted, to allow one driver to be there. That alone tells you the weight of this appearance. But it goes deeper. Because while most drivers would use that time to rest, to recover, to reset mentally, Verstappen chose the exact opposite. He went into one of the most demanding environments in motorsport. And that decision reveals something important. This is not about racing more. This is about evolving faster than everyone else. And here's where the pressure starts to build. Because Formula One drivers operate in a very controlled world. Same type of cars. Same structure. Same patterns every weekend. But the Nürburgring destroys patterns. Every lap feels different. Grip changes constantly. Traffic appears out of nowhere. Faster cars. Slower cars. Everything mixed together. There is no rhythm. Only reaction. And this is where most drivers struggle. Even experienced ones. Because the brain has no time to settle. It has to process, constantly. Corner after corner. Decision after decision. Now imagine stepping into that environment. With a completely different car. A car with ABS. With traction control. With weight that changes how it moves, how it brakes, how it rotates. Everything feels unfamiliar. Everything requires adjustment. And yet, Verstappen didn't hesitate. He didn't build up slowly. He didn't look like he needed time. He went straight into it. As if the switch had already been flipped. But that's not even the part that caught attention inside the paddock. What really stood out was how quickly he understood the car. Because driving fast is one thing. Understanding the behavior of a machine, that's something else entirely. And Verstappen was giving feedback like someone who had been inside that car for months. Precise comments. Clear direction. Small adjustments that made a difference. This is the kind of detail teams notice immediately. Because it reveals something deeper than speed. It reveals processing. Awareness. Control under pressure. And here's where another layer opens. Because this wasn't just any GT3 car. This was a Mercedes-AMG machine. A platform built on a completely different philosophy than a Formula One car. Different balance. Different braking behavior. Different aerodynamic response. And yet, he adapted to it almost instantly. Which creates a very uncomfortable implication. If a driver can switch between two completely different worlds, without losing performance, then where is the limit? But we're still not at the most important detail. Because everything so far still lives on the surface. The real shift happened in traffic. And what he did there is exactly what started to change how other drivers see this situation. Traffic at the Nürburgring is not just a challenge. It's a test of instinct. A constant stream of slower cars. Different categories. Different speeds. Different lines. All sharing the same piece of asphalt. And this is where even experienced drivers lose time. Not because they are slow, but because hesitation costs everything. One wrong decision, and the rhythm is gone. 1 second lost becomes 5. 5 becomes 10. And suddenly, your entire stint is compromised. Now here's where things changed. Because Verstappen didn't treat traffic like an obstacle. He treated it like a system. Every overtake, calculated. Every movement, intentional. No wasted motion. No visible frustration. Just flow. And that's extremely rare. Because traffic at the Nürburgring is chaotic. Unpredictable. Sometimes irrational. Cars appear in blind corners. Drivers defend when they shouldn't. Others move unexpectedly. And yet, he read it. Almost instantly. But that's not the part that made people uncomfortable. It was how early he committed to decisions. Before the corner. Before the gap fully opened. Before the situation became obvious. He was already there. Positioned. Ready. Executing. That level of anticipation does not come from experience in that category. It comes from something else. Processing speed. Confidence. And a very precise understanding of risk. And here's where it becomes even more interesting. Because in Formula One, drivers rarely deal with this kind of traffic. They race against similar cars. Predictable behavior. Structured battles. But this is survival mixed with strategy. And Verstappen didn't just survive it. He optimized it. Which leads to a bigger question. If he can manage chaos this efficiently, what happens when he returns to a controlled environment like Formula One? Because suddenly, everything feels slower. More predictable. More manageable. And that changes how a driver reacts. How early they commit. How aggressively they position the car. But we're still not at the most important shift. Because something else started to happen during those stints. Something subtle. Something that didn't show up on timing screens. But inside the car, it changed everything. And it has to do with endurance. Because for the first time in a long time, Verstappen wasn't racing for laps. He was racing for hours. And that reveals a completely different side of a driver. Endurance racing doesn't break you in one moment. It wears you down. Slowly. Quietly. Lap after lap. Corner after corner. The focus doesn't drop suddenly. It fades. Just enough to make a small mistake. And at the Nürburgring, a small mistake is never just small. Now think about this. In Formula One, everything is built around short bursts. Maximum intensity. Maximum precision. But limited duration. Here, there is no reset. No quick break. No mental restart every few minutes. You stay inside the pressure. 4 hours. And that changes how you drive. It forces patience. Forces control. Forces you to think beyond the next corner. And this is where something unexpected started to appear. Verstappen didn't push like a Formula One driver. He didn't chase every tenth. He didn't overdrive the car. He managed it. Smooth inputs. Clean exits. No unnecessary risks. Almost conservative. But only on the surface. Because underneath that calm approach, there was something very deliberate happening. He was learning. Not just the track. Not just the car. But himself. How far he could go without crossing the limit. How to stay fast without increasing risk. How to maintain performance without burning out. This is a completely different discipline. And mastering it changes a driver permanently. Because once you understand how to control your pace over hours, you gain something most drivers never fully develop. Consistency under pressure. Not for 1 lap. Not for 10 laps. But indefinitely. And here's where things take another turn. Because this kind of experience doesn't stay in endurance racing. It follows you back. Into Formula One. Into qualifying. Into race starts. Into critical moments where others begin to fade. And suddenly, the driver who trained for chaos and endurance feels more comfortable than anyone else. But there's one more layer. And this is the one that really matters. Because while Verstappen was managing stints, while he was adapting to fatigue, while he was learning to stretch performance over time, he was also doing something much more subtle. He was building control over his emotions. No frustration in traffic. No panic under pressure. No visible tension. Just clarity. And in elite motorsport, clarity is everything. Because when pressure increases, most drivers lose precision. They rush. They force decisions. They make errors. But a driver who remains calm becomes incredibly difficult to beat. And that's exactly what started to concern people. Because this wasn't just about speed anymore. This was about evolution. A driver adding layers. Becoming more complete. More controlled. More dangerous. And if that process continues, then what we saw at the Nürburgring was not the peak. It was the beginning of something much bigger. And the next time he lines up on a Formula One grid, there's a real possibility that he won't just be faster. He'll be different. In a way that others won't be able to match. And this is where everything connects. Because up to this point, you could still argue this was just a side project. A different discipline. A separate world. But that's not what the drivers are seeing. They're seeing overlap. And overlap is where problems begin. Because Formula One is not just about speed. It's about margins. Tiny differences. Milliseconds. And when a driver starts adding new layers of control, those milliseconds start disappearing. Quietly. Almost invisibly. Now think about race starts. The first corner. High pressure. Limited grip. Cars all around. Most drivers react. They adjust in the moment. But a driver who has trained in chaos anticipates before it happens. Sees the gap earlier. Commits faster. And that changes everything. But it goes even further. Tire management. One of the most critical elements in modern Formula One. Keeping performance over a stint. Knowing when to push. Knowing when to hold back. That balance decides races. And this is exactly what endurance racing sharpens. Because when you spend hours managing a car, feeling every change, adapting to degradation in real time, you develop a sensitivity that others don't have. And that sensitivity translates directly. But here's where it becomes uncomfortable. Because Verstappen was already strong in these areas. Already precise. Already consistent. So this isn't about fixing a weakness. This is about amplifying a strength. And when you amplify something that is already elite, it creates separation. Not small gaps. Big ones. The kind that are very hard to close. Now inside the paddock, nobody says this openly. They won't admit it. But they feel it. Because they understand what this means long term. This is not about one race. Not about Nurburgring. Not even about the 24 hours. This is about trajectory. Where a driver is heading. And how fast they are evolving. Because most drivers develop within the limits of Formula One. Same environment. Same references. Same learning curve. But Verstappen stepped outside of that system. And brought something back with him. Something different. Something others don't have. And that creates imbalance. But we're still missing the final piece. The one detail that explains why this moment hit so hard. Why it created tension. Why it stayed in people's minds after the weekend ended. It's not the car. It's not the track. It's not even the performance. It's the message. Because without saying anything, without making any statement, Verstappen showed that he doesn't need Formula One to define him. He can step out, adapt, compete, and still operate at the highest level, anywhere. And that changes how competitors see him. Because now, he's not just a Formula One driver. He's something more complete, more unpredictable, more difficult to prepare against. And in a sport where preparation is everything, that uncertainty becomes a weapon. So the real impact of Nürburgring was never about lap times. It was never about results. It was about perception. Because once other drivers start to believe that you can beat them in any condition, in any car, on any track, you've already gained an advantage before the race even begins. And now the question is no longer if this will matter. It's when. When does this evolution show up again? When does it translate into a decisive moment? When does it change the outcome of a race? A championship?